you? Last Friday night I grabbed the remote as well as a bag of caramel glazed popcorn, fell into the old comfy chair and prepared for a night of a double horror whammy. Initially I was in the mood for more trusty horror classics, but in the end I decided on two films that I hadn't seen before. Now, if you are anything like me and happen to be a fan of creature features, then these two films, the films that I'm going to talk to you about today, might be worthwhile checking out. Now, the first deals with a creature in the more traditional horror sense, the werewolf. And the other is a lesser known, at least in the movie sense, but yet somehow more primal and more disturbing beast of nastiness. Werewolves Within and Antlers. Both of these films have a lot to offer in terms of twists and blood and guts, and both are creature features like I've already mentioned. But what I found really cool about these two creature features is that they both introduce their respective monsters in a way that we haven't quite seen before. I will also mention that the one film surprised me, kind of went beyond my expectations, while the other I liked, but would have liked to have liked a whole lot more than I did, if you know what I mean. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to give you a spoiler-free rundown of the good, the bad, and the furry of these two newer creature features. So join me inside the den of horror! But when it comes to horror films, there are three types that tend to smell of septic socks. Horror movies based on video games because they tend to have no story. Comedy horrors because they end up being neither scary nor funny. And werewolf movies. Now I know that might come as a surprise to some of you, because if you know this channel, you know that my favorite monster of all of the classic monsters is the Wolfman, the werewolf. I love the mythology behind the creature. The only problem is, when it comes to Hollywood, these movies end up having bad production values, predictable stories, all bark, no bite. Josh Ruben's Werewolves Within combines all of the happy elements I dislike. It's a comedy horror werewolf pick based on a video game. This one happens to be pretty good. A friendly, timid sheriff new in town finds himself not only in the middle of a snowstorm, but also a murder mystery, where the murderer happens to be a, well, you know what. Now, the only thing that I didn't really like about Werewolves Within is the comedy. Now, I'm also going to admit that I'm a little bit hard to please in the comedy department. And it's not because I don't have a sense of humor, but maybe, I don't know if you are the same, my sense of humor happens to be a little bit more on the subtle side. Not that you'd be able to tell that from this channel. But if you do like your horror mixed in with some comedy that is a little bit over the top, a little bit farcical, then Werewolves Within is going to have you howling at the screen. But Josh Ruben and his talented acting cast fully embrace the comedy elements in Werewolves Within. Now, regardless of whether it's always funny or not, what it did manage to do, and I found this really cool as well as interesting, is that the comedy elements kind of gave the film this really nice pace. And it sort of filled the film up with a certain level of playful energy that might not have left old Sour Grapes here always laughing, but it certainly left him feeling good about this world. And I hope it does the same for you. Something else that I found really cool about Werewolves Within, and maybe you'll agree with me, is that although the comedy elements are over the top, it's the horror that's pretty subtle. It has this real snowed-in, claustrophobic kind of atmosphere, and I like how the film contains the murder mystery story within the confines of this little town going through a snowstorm. But what's also really cool is that the film is pretty patient in the way that it reveals the monster. It doesn't do so in the first frame like so many other horror movies do. It kind of reminded me a little bit of that brilliant murder mystery Rian Johnson's film Knives Out, with its ensemble cast of quirky characters all running around trying to find out who the killer is. Only in the case of Werewolves Within, the killer happens to have a pair of pointy ears and a bushy tail. So if you haven't seen Werewolves Within, you definitely should. there's a lot to appreciate about this movie. And what I also really liked is that it kind of gave the horror subgenre, the werewolf subgenre, a much needed return to good production values and a sharp story. So if you like, on occasion, a horror film with its slobbery tongue stuck firmly within its cheek, then I fully recommend Werewolves Within. Have you noticed how I can't say the word werewolves? I said werewolf. Okay, I'm starting this next part off on a kind of a weird note. It's probably completely beside the point, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. How do you feel about when a movie makes a big deal about who produced the movie? I mean, I know that the producers are important in making the movie possible, but I've always felt a little bit weird, like at the top of a movie poster when it says produced by so-and-so, even as in the case of Antlers, where the producers happen to be really big shots like David S. Goya and Guillermo del Toro. But it's like my spidey sense kicks in. I don't know if it's because in the past, whenever a movie says this or makes a big deal about it, the movie ends up not being as good as the big names at the top. It's kind of like you're telling me who didn't make the movie. You're not telling me about the director, you're not telling me the actors or the writers. I don't know, I'm probably completely off the mark here. Now, to say that my expectations for Antlers were high is like saying Michael Myers had a little issue with his sister. Directed by Scott Cooper, starring Kerry Russell and Jesse Plemons, and yes, in case I forgot to mention, produced by Guillermo del Toro and David S. Goya, Antlers is not a bad film. In fact, it's actually a pretty darn good film, and right there is where my issue with the film lies. It's not that it was directed by a truly brilliant director, because it was. It's not that it stars a brilliant cast, which it does. And yes, it's not that it has brilliant producers, which it also has. But it's that the story actually has a brilliant premise. And right at the center of that brilliant premise is a flippin' creature that is creepier than a psycho dancing clown that'll put the flippin' scare back into your nightmares in no flippin' time. Antlers is about a school teacher, brilliantly played by Kerry Russell, who believes that one of her young students is suffering some sort of domestic abuse, only the true source of the trouble runs even deeper than that. Now, given the brilliant cast and crew, as well as that intriguing story, you're probably sitting there right now saying, "Hey Den, the movie sounds great, what's your flippin' problem?" Sometimes horror movies can be silly, but sometimes in exploring deep and dark themes, like Antlers does, they begin taking themselves a little bit too seriously. Look at Werewolves Within. It takes the fun factor and puts it front and fore. Antlers, however, buries it deep beneath these heavy themes of abuse, and after such a terrifying opening scene, seems to forget to have a little bit of fun. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that horror movies can't be deep and dark. I mean, if you look at movies like The Witch or The Babadook, these are prime examples of just how riveting horror movies can be, even when they do have these heavy, deep and dark themes. And I think that Antlers was kind of aiming in this direction, but sort of misses the mark a little bit. It almost earnestly tries to explore the dilemmas of its characters, but in doing so, kind of forgets to just have a little bit of good old-fashioned horror fun. Now, never fear, the film is never boring. It's just that the middle act gets a little bit too slow for my liking. However, in the final third, it picks up some significant pace. The great acting, the very creepy atmosphere, and the promise of a truly terrifying creature, which, kind of like Werewolves Within, Antlers is patient in revealing. This film might not keep you on the edge of your seat, but it will certainly keep you sitting up. So should you watch Antlers? I feel that you should, because as a horror fan, I think that you'll appreciate the film's attempt to mix up the creature feature with some of horror's darker themes. And talking about creatures, this film might just be the unearthing of a new breed of horror monster. Now, thank you so much for joining me on this Friday night double horror movie special. I always enjoy sharing my thoughts with you. And if you want to check out another double whammy that I watched a few moons ago, then be sure to check out the link below, where I jumped into The Wretched and As Above, So Below. And if there's anything else that you out there think that I should watch, I'm always interested to hear what rocked and shocked you in the world of horror. As for me, I'm off to watch a somewhat forgotten horror movie gem, the psychological horror classic Deliverance, starring Burt Reynolds. Have you seen it? If not, well, never fear. Next time I'll give you a hopefully spoiler-free reflection on that film. So everyone out there, love you, leave you, stay safe, stay happy, stay horror. Sounds of this little town suffering a snowfall.